pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening and welcome to Pekin Community High School. We're here for a regular meeting of the Board of Education. We'll start with calling the meeting to order. Mr. White, would you please call the roll?
Alessandrini?
Here.
Vera?
Here.
Hoheimer?
Here.
Howard?
Here.
Huey?
Here.
Wrigley?
Here.
Hill?
Here. All members of the board are present, so we'll move on with our agenda. That being item number 2, the approval of minutes. Those minutes being the Student Achievement Committee meeting of December 14th, 2017, the Labor Management Relations Committee meeting of January 4th, 2018, the Student Achievement Committee meeting of January 18th, 2018, Policy Committee meeting of January 22nd, 2018, the regular board meeting of January 22nd, 2018, the first closed session of the regular board meeting of January 22nd, 2018, and the second closed session of the regular board meeting of January 22nd, 2018. Looking for a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Barra, second by Mrs. Hoheimer. Questions or comments? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Vera?
Aye.
Hoheimer?
Aye.
Alessandrini?
Aye.
Howard?
Aye.
Huey?
Aye.
Wrigley?
Aye.
Hill?
Aye. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Moving on to item 3, communications, public comments, and participation. We'll start out with board applause. Mr. Barra, we'll start down with you.
I have nothing this evening.
All right. Mr. Alessandrini?
I do not have anything.
Mrs. Hoheimer?
I will expound upon that. I also have nothing.
Mr. Wrigley?
I'm going to follow suit.
I have something. I have
Go
a
right
good
ahead.
one, very good one. I'd like to congratulate Anthony Dunker, Gavin Rudolph, or I think it's Rudolph, and Storm Elwinger, who competed. They're all culinary arts students, and they competed in the Central Illinois High School Chopped competition, which is a culinary arts competition, and they received the silver second place medal in that. Also would add this, I was told that in addition to doing very well in the competition, that comments were made about how well-dressed and presented our students were and how well-disciplined they were, apparently in contrast with some others in attendance. Whereas Pekin High School, we like to see our students compete very well. The presentation and so forth that they make, the impression they make out in the public is also equally important to us. So I congratulate them on doing both of those things well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Howard?
I'd like to direct my board applause to the district's state of the district event that occurred on January 29th. From where I sat that evening, the program was flawless from beginning to end, and it was exceedingly well received. I think the way that the evening went so smoothly was an indication of all the hardworking planning and effort that went into it, and it showed. I can say in all honesty, I don't think I've ever felt more proud to be involved with this district, and I simply want to say thank you to the faculty and the staff and the administration and the students and anyone that had anything to do with that, and I hope that we see lots more of those.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. I thought I was going to get away with getting that as my board applause.
I thought I might get you.
So just to add on to that, I just the overwhelming response that I've heard even from community members that attended the event. Dr. Owens, are you planning on giving any update on State of the Union?
Sure.
Because I think or State of the District.
State of the Union.
Oh, boy.
Mine might be shorter.
Well, I just generally, I think we had almost 300 people in attendance, community leaders, parents of students. I mean, just really, really exciting to see. We got to culinary arts started off with a wonderful presentation to all the students, or I'm sorry, all the participants. We had a wonderful meal. Then we entered into the theater, and we got to see our new promotional video that was put together, which I don't think has been released yet publicly, but we've got to see a little snippet of it. But it's absolutely amazing, all the different things that were able to be showcased in that video, and then to see the breakout sessions run by our students in our different departments was incredible to see. So just want to echo Mr. Howard's comments on a wonderful State of the District event. Moving on to the Student Council report.
Good evening. February is typically a very busy month, so I have a longer update for you tonight. To start off, Valentine's Spirit Week was very successful. We started something new this year where students could send their classmates a Valentine's Day gram, and attached to the gram was a treat. We were excited to sell as many as we did, and the student body loved them. That week, we also did a candy guess where students could guess how many pieces of candy were in a jar, and that person who was the closest got to receive the candy. Adding to the week of Valentine's Day was Dragon Spotlight. We were pleased with the outcome of our annual talent show. The theater was filled, and students, staff, and the community all enjoyed it. We had a variety of acts that really displayed how much talent there really is within the school, and I think that's something we should all be proud of. Coming up this Friday is the Morp Blacklight Dance. This year's theme is Glow with the Flow. Tickets are on sale now for this event. It's going to be a fun-filled night with music, dancing, and neon face painting. Our next event coming up after Morp is Library Family Fun. It's this coming Monday, the 5th. This committee will be performing The Lorax by Dr. Seuss at several grade schools that day, and then at the Peakland Public Library at 6 p.m. that night. Lastly, we are beginning to think about elections for this next year's Student Council. Those who want to be on executive board or just a representative have gotten their informational packets and are beginning the process for the elections. This year, elections are going to be online and on March 15th. Thank you for listening to this month's update. See you next month.
Katie,
Yes.
I'm curious if you know who the poor kid was that had to count all that candy so you knew how much was in there.
That was Mr. Everett.
You know what? I really had an ulterior motive in asking that question because I know you to be hardworking and conscientious, and if you'd said, yeah, me, I wouldn't have been surprised.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, next item of business will be under communications will be the evidence-based funding formula. Dr. Owens.
Melissa's going to move that back so everybody can see. Carla and I have spent quite a bit of time throughout the year trying to digest what is Illinois' new funding formula for education. I know it's shocking, but it's not quite so easily understood, just like the old formula was not. But we thought we would take just a few minutes, we being me, because she's homesick. She bailed on me. But to kind of go over this in a nutshell, just what this means, what it's supposed to mean, and what realistically we hope that means for Pekin High. So the first slide is just representative, the left-hand graphic of how current funding works, which obviously is inequitable. Property taxes drive a lot of what schools get, and if you're in a wealthy area, you tend to have school districts that look very wealthy and get a lot of money, and then at the end of the day, the state gives everybody equal amount, and obviously we know that not everybody needs equal amounts. So some schools are way overfunded, technically, and some schools are underfunded. Obviously, the second graphic is equal funding, and so that technically doesn't work because you still have disproportionate districts throughout the state. Obviously, it turns into a lot of discussions around what the suburbs of Chicago look like versus everybody else. And so there was a lot of time taken. This is probably one of the best things to come out of the state of Illinois, which hasn't obviously had a lot of positive things come out of it lately, was the evidence-based funding model. A lot of time taken with panels and studies to determine a way to more equitably fund schools and make sure schools that are in areas that can foot their bills, they're footing their bills, and in schools that can't, they're getting extra support. So that is what the hope is moving forward in terms of what that model looks like. There's four major components that go into this. There's a local capacity target, which means basically how much money is your school able to garnish from your community. Typically what that means is property taxes, but what is your local capacity to support your school? The base funding minimum is basically what we were supposed to have gotten and have gotten up to this point. If you remember the old number, I think it's $6,119 per student, right, is supposedly what we were supposed to get for the last several years, and then they started prorating that. So we weren't even getting that, whether it was an 85% proration, 92% proration. But the base funding minimum for this formula is basically what we got last year, plugged into the formula so that no one gets less than what they got before. And then the tier distribution, which I'll explain in a second, is then depending on what tier your school is designated, depends how much money you get and how many pots of money you get. So I'll explain that in a second. But basically that all comes into play, and then they determine an adequacy target. So how much should you be funded at versus how much you actually are funded by the state, and then how do they make up the difference. The interesting thing about evidence-based funding is they base the principles of 26 research-based elements in schools. And so what you see on the next slide, and I'm going to jump back and forth, but they take everything from class size to number of student activities to school supplies to how many nurses you should have in the building, how many librarians you should have. But basically, they've spent all this time on these 26 elements to determine, research says in a school your size, whatever that school size is, this is what you should have. So then you can plug in your district what you actually have versus what it says you should have or don't have, or maybe you have too much of, not usually. And then it gives you a platform for determining if we do get the money we're supposed to, then where should that money go? So it's an interesting exercise to walk through in terms of where our staffing is and where the state says it should, but supposedly it's still going to be a local control issue. So Pekin High obviously looks very different from other high schools in the state. We have a huge CTE program, which not a lot of high schools have. So when you put in our number of elective teachers, which aren't core teachers, and you don't classify CTE as core, it makes our numbers look, for instance, very skewed, right? We have a huge number of extracurricular or different elective teachers versus what it says we should, but we know that at Pekin High, there's a reason for that. So it's not foolproof in terms of what it says, but at least gives you some research to put behind. What then it gives you is applies different elements for where it thinks the money has to go in terms of needs. So your enrollment comes into play, how many English language learners you have, how many students with IEPs, and how many low-income students you have. So that all goes into the formula because technically any of those situations typically are students that would technically cost more to educate, so it's put into the formula that way. And then, to be fair, they apply a salary-based comparable wage index, basically so that everybody has a different index, but depending on what area of the state you live in. So that's weighed into the formula as well. So let me go back and see if I missed anything on that previous slide. So the hope is, you see that hashtag no red numbers. So they've claimed right from the get-go, since the start of the conversation around the new funding formula, was that no one would receive less than what they're already receiving. So That's hopefully what happens. Obviously, it depends how much money gets pumped into the system, but that's the whole thought. So what does this mean for Pekin High? And those numbers are really, really hard to read. But basically what that means is our base funding minimum that we have been getting from the state, or that we've gotten from the state this year, was basically $2.9 million. So when they put Pekin High in the whole state up against every other school and the resources that we have, basically what they said is Pekin High is at 57% adequacy. So the state is funding Pekin High at 57% of what they technically should be funding Pekin High. So in the state tiered system, there's 3 tiers. We're actually a tier 1 school, meaning we're one of the lowest, or in the group of the lowest funded schools by the state, meaning we're the first school, one of the first schools supposedly that will benefit from money pushed into the system. So a tier 1 school is targeted to get the most money to start bringing up to adequacy. Tier 2, second funded. Tier 3, basically like you're good to go and we don't really need to worry about you, so good luck. So the goal is obviously in 15 years that everyone is in a tier 3 situation, that everyone is funded to the same adequacy amount, okay? So 50% of any new revenue in the state for this year will go towards funding tier 1 schools. So there's buckets of money, that's what they keep saying. There's buckets of money. I'm waiting, it's like trees, but anyway. So Pekin will get money out of bucket number 1, but because we're a tier 1 school that we still have to work, that only gets us up to tier 2, and then tier 3, we get another bucket of money. So technically, we get 2 buckets of money for a total of what supposedly is around $727,000 additional funding this year. Now, I say this, and remember we kept talking about this, like we're gonna do a presentation on this, but we're trying to wait to see what our finalized, we still don't have final numbers. So $727,000 is the estimate of what we will get from the state. Payments haven't been coming. We've been told in April we'll get final recognition of what we're getting, but the fiscal year ends at the end of June. So remains to be seen if we'll get that money, but basically what this says is instead of getting 2.9 million, we're gonna get 3.6 million. If that happens, great. If that doesn't happen, obviously it was something we didn't budget for, not knowing the number anyway, but at some point, hopefully that's what that means is additional new money. So as we move forward, here's kind of what evidence and the research tells us. I think people are already touting, and depending on what politician you want to listen to, that this is probably the strongest funding system that a state can implement for fair and equitable funding. And I think that's true based on the minimum knowledge that I have. I think it's a great thing that's happened in the state. I think it's a long time overdue that the state has recognized that there's too much money going some places and not enough others, and this is going to rectify it. The problem, of course, is it comes down to if it's funded or not. So this year, I think you saw that it was like 790 million or billion was asked for to be budgeted in additional money for just education. Well, I could probably bet $1 billion that I don't have that's not going to happen. So then what does that mean and how is that funded is all going to depend on how much money goes into the system. So budget time will come up. We'll see what happens. It's an election year, so that can either play one of 2 ways. We'll get a budget or we won't, and it'll depend on the politicians in Springfield. But at the end of the day, the system's only as good as the money that follows the system. So what this tells us is that Pekin High's in a really good situation to gain from this system that the state has recognized that they're not funding their share. What's interesting about it is we know what fund balances look like here, right? And we know the scenario that we're in, that we're being conservative, but we also have fund balances that we've built for a long time so that we could do things smartly. So what's interesting is our taxpayers, of course, have always supported our schools and done that rightly so, but hopefully, if the system is implemented and the money follows, then we would be in a position someday that then we would be potentially asking less, taxes are abated, tax rates go down, and people's tax bills get lower because the state's finally pushing in their share of what they should have been funding all along. That's a huge if. That's the great bubble that we all want to think will happen and should happen, but at the end of the day, I think Illinois still has a revenue problem. I think people are still moving out of the state. So whether or not it comes to fruition in any of our ages here, that remains to be seen. But the thought process would be if we actually get what we're supposed to get, the conversations we get to have look very, very different than they have the past couple years. So it comes back to, okay, where, now we have the extra money, where does it go? And based on the evidence-based elements, where are we lacking? Where's money, where do we need to push money into? And I can guarantee you that the state, if they fund us more, are going to expect accountability in terms of what the money is actually being spent on in relation to what your elements look like. So I think the day is coming that if we get the $700-some thousand or whatever amount we get, then there'll be a report that we all get to fill out. So where'd you spend that money and why? And it won't get to be just, well, we decided to hire another PE teacher, or whatever it is. It will have to point back to the evidence-based elements and say, well, we noticed in these staffing patterns we were low, or we noticed that this area was an area of need and we've addressed it through the hiring of this or the spending of that. But it'll be interesting to see how this evidence-based funding ties into ESSA's requirements, the new, you're not supposed to say this, but the new No Child Left Behind, and how those all are going to tie together and how schools are going to be held accountable moving forward. So that is like next on the list to have some conversations about in terms of ESSA and what that looks like and how schools are going to be held accountable, but this gives you a little bit of background in terms of what the new funding formula looks like and hopefully what we'll garner from that in the first year at least.
Dr. Owens, with CPPRT, corporate personal property tax, that being replaced, or I'm sorry, just reduced this year, was that looked at before this evidence-based funding model was created? Like, was one relation to the other, or was this new funding formula created? Thought we had this new pot of money, and now CPPRT is
Right. what,
$700,000 deficit?
So when they first created this formula and the advanced formula, CPPRT, is counted in as your local, like your, what was the term? Your local capacity. So CPPRT was part of your local capacity. So obviously last year our CPPRT money looked very different than this year's. And so so that's where our base minimum gets. So we're good in terms of we have a base minimum, but it'll take a couple years and that'll start to impact because it'll impact our local capacity. Now, supposedly, if the system works the way it should, if that goes down, the state realizes we're still at a tier 1 and need more money. The one thing that they said too is built into the system, so obviously pension reform continues to come up. And who should be paying for pensions? Obviously, we all kind of like sucked our breath in pretty deeply in the last couple weeks because Rauner's State of the Union address or his budget speech talked about schools just got all of this new money. We're fully funding schools, but by the way, starting next year, 25% of pension costs should be shifted back to schools, and in 4 years, 100%. So basically, we just took one step here, and he took us back 3 steps. So all that no red numbers, it's out the window. That's the nicest way I can say it. But so everyone that's not a Rauner proponent in the state is saying, we're calling your bluff. You just said you're fully funding schools. You know you're not fully funding schools. Now you're taking more money away because they're going to pay for their own pensions. Supposedly that formula builds in. So if that starts to shift, then the adequacy adjusts accordingly and the state picks that up on the other side. But if the state doesn't fund it again and they still shift, we're going to be back below where we're at.
Dr. Owens, with all due respect, I understand your optimism and I share your hope, but the state of Illinois saying it's so doesn't make it so. We have a long, you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
No, I know, no.
We have a long history of them saying one thing and doing another. Between prorating income, cost shifts like pension and transportation, and then unfunded mandates. This is one of those things that I'll believe it when I see it, and then I'm not even sure I'll believe it then. They always estimate our income as high, and they always estimate our losses as low. And over the years, we've been blessed in this district to have 2 outstanding business managers. And invariably, those business managers say they've estimated income high and losses low. So not to contradict what you've said, and I'm not surprising you with what I'm saying, but the proof's in the pudding. And I'm going to cross my fingers and hope, because at risk are our kids and our faculty.
The other thing that obviously the legislature is coming back, and as the numbers start to come out in everybody's district, you're already seeing a few bills being presented. One is to take into account on the local capacity is education foundations, booster club monies. Any money that comes into the district would be included in your local capacity. And so that will be interesting, because obviously there's many districts that have very high incomes in their education foundations, and obviously somebody took a look at that and said, you know, we need to put that into because right now it is not included in the local capacity.
I admire what they're trying to do, and I pray they're successful. I mean, there are districts in the suburbs where a high school district has an EAV that's greater than or equal to the entire EAV of our whole county. And if you ever see one of those school campuses, not only do they have everything, but they have 10 of everything. And if this thing equalizes this thing and brings it down, I'll be ready to punch out and go.
It's like anything else. I think if the politics could get out of this and the politicians could get out of the way, the funding formula itself is solid. It's just going to depend how much money gets put in without all the things that siphon out. Because I will tell you, our CPPRT obviously went down by almost $1 million this year. There's already things hidden in the budget that will siphon more money off that for next year. So, so at the same time they say no red numbers, we know, right, that we had red numbers this year. And we only were able to balance that out because of the cost savings we had. Otherwise, we'd be having a whole different conversation. So it's just like anything, you know, you plan for the best and prepare for the worst and Carla tries to create a budget based on information that's floating out there that she doesn't even have, and we go from there. But, you know, it's a credit again to this community and the support that it shows of its school that we're able to weather things like this and not have to have conversations that sound very different, and can still move forward. So, I mean, I am being positive. I'm positive that at some point, like, I'm a history major, so everything's in cycles, so I believe truly, like, at some point, Illinois has to cycle its way out of this. I hope I still live here when it happens, but we'll see, so.
I always forget the acronym and even what it stands for, but we took $1 million hit recently.
Right, that's the CPPRT.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
one I can
Yep,
never.
that's the corporate
but-
personal property replacement tax.
Yep, and if it wasn't for that, I believe you told us that we could have had a balanced budget this year.
We would have been in the black, yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Owens. Continue to obviously keep us in the loop as the evidence-based funding formula will surely change, or at least we'll have a better picture in April.
When we get a check, I will let you know.
All right, moving on to the last item under Section 3 is public comments. If there's anyone in the audience that wishes to address the board at this time, they may do so. Just go ahead and come up to the podium, state your name, the reason for you being here, and you'll have 5 minutes to address the board. Okay, moving on to item number 4, approval of claims.
Mr. President, I move for the payment of the monthly warrants in the amount of $1,980,790.45 per detailed and summary information that includes manual checks and board bills for approval.
I'll second.
Motion by Mr. Alessandrini, second by Mr. Howard. Questions or comments on the monthly warrants? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Alessandrini.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye.
Vera.
Aye.
Hillheimer.
Aye.
Huey.
Aye.
Wrigley.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye, motion carries. Item number 5, new business. The first item under new business will be our first closed session. That's a request for closed session regarding the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of a specific employee of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee of the public body or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity, the purchase or lease of real property for the use of the public body, including meetings held for the purpose of discussing whether a particular parcel should be acquired, and student discipline cases. Do I have a motion by Mr. Wrigley?
Second.
Second by Mr. Howard. Questions or comments on the request for closed session? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Wrigley.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye.
Alessandrini.
Aye.
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 All right.
Aye, motion carries. We'll be back from closed session as soon as we can. First item on the agenda will be the consent agenda. Is there any item that a board member wishes to have removed from the consent agenda?
Motion for approval.
Motion from Mr. Wrigley, second by Mrs. Hoheimer. Questions or comments on the consent agenda? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Aye.
Hillheimer.
Aye.
Alessandrini.
Aye.
Vera.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye.
Huey.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye. Consent agenda is approved. Moving on to 5.3, student discipline.
Mr. President, I would make the motion that the student identified as 17-02-18 be expelled for reasons of gross misconduct, that expulsion being through the remainder of the 17-18 school year and through the first semester of the 18-19 school year.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Howard, second by Mr. Wrigley. Questions about the student discipline case? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Howard.
Aye.
Wrigley.
Aye.
Alessandrini.
Aye.
Vera.
Aye.
Hillheimer.
Aye.
Huey.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye, motion carries.
Mr. Hill, can we go back just 1 second on the agenda?
Yes, I'm sorry.
I just want to recognize the new scholarship that was formed, I'm sorry,
No, thank you.
by the Sandrock family. There are a couple here in Pekin who wanted to, they met with Melissa and I and wanted to see what they could do about funding a student's complete education from freshman through senior year. So we spent a lot of time talking about what that could look like. So they are committing to this year an application process where 2 students will be fully funded to go to ICC for 2 years, each of them, which is about $5,000 annually for tuition and tuition costs to ICC. And then after those 2 years, they will fund basically half of what it would be equivalent of Illinois State's tuition, about $12,500 for their final 2 years. Each student, if they're successful, now they can go wherever they want to go, but they would have $12,500 in each of their final 2 years put towards the cost of their last 2 years for 2 people. So I think in total, and I think I did the math wrong, is it 70? I think about close to $70,000 that they're committing to 2 students for the next 4 years to basically fully fund, or close to fully fund their college education. So, sorry, I just wanted to point that out.
That's
but-
awesome.
No, thank you very much. I meant to bring that up. So thank you very much for that, that update, Dr. Owens. And it's great to see all the different opportunities and scholarships that have come to light, both long-term and some of our new ones that have come over the last few years. So thank you for that.
Yep.
Moving on to 5.4, policies for a first reading. Mr. Wrigley.
Yes, the Policy Committee is presenting 14 policies for a first reading. Be advised that 25 additional policies are not included because the district does not have a version of the policy currently, and it was decided not to recommend the press document for adoption, or because suggested press changes considered during the review were limited to what press refers to as minor continuous improvements, otherwise known as legal footnotes and references. Policies possibly were deemed unnecessary or undesirable, or were considered confined to footnotes or legal cross-references. I just said that. So those policies are 2-260, 4-170, 5-20, 5-90, 5-220, 5-240, 5-290, 6-50, 6-150, 770, 7-150, 7-180, 7-250, and 7-305. The recommendation is to lay over these policies as presented for action at a future date.
That recommendation comes from policy and does not require a second. Any board members have any questions on these policies? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Ridley,
Aye.
Allison Green,
Aye.
Vera,
Aye.
Holheimer,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Huey,
Aye.
Hill.
Aye. Motion carries. 5.5, Administrator Contract, Dr. Owens.
Starting on page 296, you will see the superintendent's contract for 3 years noted. So it is to recommend, this is weird, I'm recommending board approval of the superintendent's contract renewal as presented.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Howard, second by Mr. Wrigley. Questions or comments on the administrator contract? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Howard,
Aye.
Ridley,
Aye.
Allison Green,
Aye.
Vera,
Aye.
Holheimer,
Aye.
Huey,
Aye.
Hill.
Aye. Motion carries. Administrator contract is approved.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yep, go right ahead.
Go ahead.
5.6.
On page
proposed
305 is the proposed district calendar for the 18-19 school year. This district calendar has been reviewed by LMRC, and the final draft's prepared for you. You can see it on page 305. There's not really a whole lot different in next year's calendar than this year. We are still coming back on a Teacher Institute Day on a Wednesday, which will make the first full day of student attendance on Friday in the middle of August. There'll be a full 2 weeks for winter break, and trying to think if there's anything else of note. Because the way the calendar falls, I will say that the first semester is probably the longest in terms of the number of days. There's always a concern about how much difference in number of days between first and second semester there is, and they're the most equal that they've ever been. I mean, they're not equal, but they're more in balance. So we would recommend board approval of the proposed district calendar for the 18-19 school year as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Hoheimer, second by Mr. Alessandrini. Questions or comments about the calendar as presented?
Still doing the Wednesday off before Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Any other questions? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Holheimer,
Aye.
Allison Green,
Aye.
Vera,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Huey,
Aye.
Ridley,
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Item 5.7, resolution for purchase of property. Dr. Owens.
So one of the programs that we're obviously very proud of is the construction trades program that always requires us to find lots for those homes to be built on. So on page 306, you will see a resolution that we recommend the Board of Education to purchase the following described property, lots 5 and 6 in Sunset Lakes, commonly known as 1856 and 1852 Autumn Ridge Drive in Pekin. The thought is that those two lots will be the lots for the building of the 1819 and 1920 construction homes for Pekin High School. So we recommend board adoption of this resolution for the purchase of property as presented.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Huey, second by Mr. Alessandrini. Questions or comments?
Dr. Owens, I think it bears mentioning that these two lots together cost approximately the same as what we paid for one lot last time.
That is,
And it's part of our ongoing effort to be fiscally responsible.
that is correct. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Huey,
Aye.
Alessandrini.
Aye.
Vera,
Aye.
Holheimer,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Ridley,
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. 5.8 PCHS Dragon Athletic Boosters Sponsorship Recognition Plan for 2017-2018 Spring Sports. Dr. Owens.
So since we're in the inaugural year of the athletic boosters, it has been our routine as the start of a sports season starts to determine how we would like to allow the boosters to recognize sponsors on campus, since that is not something that has been done before. I'd like to recommend board approval to allow the PCHS Dragon Athletic Boosters to use 2 sets of signs identical to those now displayed in Hawkins Gym, each sign featuring a gray background and the sponsor's logo. One set of signs will be mounted on the fence line at the soccer field, and the other one will be placed on the outside of the fence on Stadium Drive, outside the baseball fence line.
Heard the recommendation from the administration. Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Barra,
Second.
second by Mr. Wrigley. Questions or comments? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Vera,
Aye.
Ridley,
Aye.
Alessandrini,
Aye.
Holheimer,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Huey,
Aye.
Hill.
Aye, motion carries. 5.9 bids for summer work to replace building F ceiling and lighting. Dr. Owens.
Okay, so with Carla sick, I'm like on the hot seat here. Okay, so the bids for summer work, we have lots of summer work starting. The first one is to replace the building F ceilings, which actually will be a 2-summer project, as well as the lighting. We recommend board approval of the base and alternate bids totaling $355,100 as submitted by PIPCO companies, as well as the base and alternate bids totaling $232,050 as submitted by Allied Construction, for a grand total of $587,150 for the building F ceilings and lighting replacement project subject to provisions of the Prevailing Wage Act. As a reminder, this amount for these next 3 projects are all monies that are coming from health, life, safety funds.
So moved.
Second.
Don't need a second, it comes from committee.
Sorry.
That's right.
That's okay. So we'll actually have Mr. Alessandrini make the motion, if that's okay with everyone.
On behalf of the Operations and Maintenance Committee, I make that motion.
Thank you. That motion doesn't require a second. So any questions on the replacement of the F ceiling and lighting? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Alessandrini,
Aye.
Vera,
Aye.
Holheimer,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Huey,
Aye.
Ridley,
Aye.
Hill.
Aye. Motion carries. 5.10 bids for summer work to replace Building B boilers and heat exchangers. Dr. Owens.
So recommend board approval of the base and alternate bids totaling $288,950 as submitted by O'Brien Brothers, as well as the base and alternate bids totaling $18,978 as submitted by Fleming Electric, for a grand total of $307,928 for the Building B boilers and heat exchangers replacement project subject to provisions of the Prevailing Wage Act.
On behalf of the O&M Committee, I can't even say it, make that motion.
That motion doesn't require a second. So any questions or comments on the summer work presented?
He's not got it.
Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Aye.
Hoheimer,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Huey,
Aye.
Wrigley,
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. 5.11, bid for summer work to upgrade buildings EFGH 1963 electrical equipment. Dr. Owens.
So again, this will be a two-summer project, actually. We recommend board approval of the base and alternate bids totaling $494,505 as submitted by Oberlander Electric for buildings EFG and H 1963 electrical equipment upgrade project subject to provisions of the Prevailing Wage Act. I will note too, the original estimate for this project alone was over $700,000. That's what we were estimated to spend. So when we totaled up these last three projects, we came in right around between $350,000 and just over $400,000 in savings. So what that will allow us to do, since that is health, life, safety money that has to be spent, we'll look for another project to put that money to, because obviously we need to spend that money down. So that, just to kind of let you know how these three bid processes came in.
On behalf of the Operations and Maintenance Committee, make that motion to approve.
Motion by the Operation and Maintenance Committee. Any questions or comments? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Allison Greenie,
Aye.
Vera,
Aye.
Hoheimer,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Huey,
Aye.
Wrigley,
Aye.
Hill.
Aye. Motion carries. 5.12, bid for summer work to partially replace the Building G roof, Phase 4. Dr. Owens.
So 4 years later, and we will be done with the G building roof. We broke that into quarters, as you know, and started 4 years ago. 3 of those 4 roofing projects were all done by Wyman Roofing, which is no longer in existence. So when we went out for bid this year, we had 5 bidders for this project, but we recommend board approval of the base bid in the amount of $215,700 as submitted by Top Quality Roofing for Phase 4 of the Building G roof partial replacement project subject to provisions of the Prevailing Wage Act.
On behalf of the Operations and Maintenance Committee, I make that motion.
Motion is made by the Operation and Maintenance Committee. Questions or comments?
Mr. President, as a member of the Operation and Maintenance Committee, I just want to say that I think it's absolutely wonderful that we're improving the appearance of our building, the energy efficiency of our building, the safety of our building, and it's not impacting district funds. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. Everything's working the way it's designed to work. And that's in large part due to this administrative staff and Mr. Bonnet, Building and Grounds.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Any other comments or questions on the bid project? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Allison Greenie,
Aye.
Vera,
Aye.
Hoheimer,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Huey,
Aye.
Wrigley,
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on to item number 6 will be reports, starting with resignations. Mrs. Hoheimer.
Yes, I have 2 resignations to report on tonight. That's Javiera Green, teacher for the English department, effective at the end of the 2018 school year, and Rob Oliver, assistant coach for the girls swim program, effective February 15th, 2018.
Thank you, Mrs. Hoheimer. Moving on to Policy Committee report, Mr. Wrigley.
No report this evening.
Thank you. Operation Maintenance Committee, Mr. Alessandrini.
We did meet this evening. We reviewed the bids that were just approved by the board. Continued discussion on our rolling, more or less 4 or 5 year plan. We reviewed natural gas and electric pricing going forward. as we are a member of the IEC, Illinois Energy Consortium. We've asked for a 3-year contract going out. They've provided attractive pricing to lock in for 3 years, and the administration will be taking care of that and locking us in for 3 years. Received an update in regards to our participation with the community solar project that we will look at as further information comes along in the next couple months on that. The faculty completed the facility audit over the last several months, and some new projects will come up for our summer projects that will take care of that. So we had a quick 1-hour meeting, and a lot was covered in that 1 hour.
Thank you, Mr. Alessandrini. Moving on to 6.4 LMRC, Dr. Owens.
We actually are meeting this Thursday.
Thank you very much. 6.5 Student Achievement Committee, Dr. Owens.
We met, I believe, a couple weeks ago. We continued work on, we've been talking about grading procedures and practices, so we reconfirmed the grading practices sheet that we had made recommendations to use, which most departments have already implemented and will continue to focus on for the rest of the year and moving forward. And then we had a conversation around late work and how our district staff right now handles late work, and how we propose that happens moving forward, so we're all on the same page.
Thank you very much. Any FOIA requests this month?
I had 2 FOIA requests. One FOIA request was from the Illinois Retired Teachers Association asking for any retirees, certified retirees, and their email, so I passed Mr. Kestner's information along. And then the other one was from Local Labs, which is a publisher of Prairie State Wire, asking for our collective bargaining agreement as well as information on all of our collective bargaining unit members, salaries, those type of things. So when those type of things are asked, if it's information that we can grab, that we have in a spreadsheet form or something, we usually give what we have. We don't have to create something. So we were able to pull a lot of what they wanted and then directed them to our website for other information that they've asked for. So that was it.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 7, future agenda items. Is there any action items a board member wishes to place on a future agenda? All right, moving on to item 8, announcements. Just a reminder, the Illinois Central, let's try this again. The IASB Central Illinois Valley Division Spring Meeting is scheduled March 22nd at Princeville Junior High School. Please let Mr. White know if you plan to attend that. Reservations must be made no later than March 12th. Wednesday, May 2nd, we're having our annual summer governing meeting at Metamora Fields Golf Club. And then November 16th through the 18th is the joint annual III conference, so be sure to put that on your schedule. Last item is the next regular board meeting will be here in this room on March 26th, starting at 6:30. And the last item I have is a request for closed session regarding the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of a specific employee of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee of the public body or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity. Do I have a motion to that effect? Motion by Ms. Hoheimer.
Second.
Second by Mr. Huey. Questions or comments? Mr. White, would you call the roll?
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. We will have no further action items after this closed session, so for all intents and purposes, we stand adjourned for the evening. Thank you all very much.